of The Appeal and Now This. I'm your host for today, Jay Willis, senior contributor at The Appeal. And today we are covering the unfolding crisis in the United States Postal Service, which, in addition to the valuable low-cost services it provides to all Americans on a daily basis, is also suddenly integral to the administration of this year's presidential election in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. Since the appointment of Louis DeJoy, a Trump donor with no previous postal experience, as Postmaster General in May, a series of policy changes he's implemented have resulted in lengthy delays to deliveries of medication, checks, and other mail, and perhaps even more ominously, warnings from postal officials that they may be unable to deliver ballots in time for many states' mail-in deadlines in November. So Democratic House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has convened the House for a special session to deal with the threat to the Postal Service, as bipartisan calls mount for Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to do the same. Meanwhile, the USPS Board of Governors is requesting financial relief to ensure that mail gets delivered. There's bipartisan legislation in the Senate and an infrastructure bill passed by the House. Each of them propose about $25 billion in funds for the Postal Service. Now, President Trump has said he does not support a funding package for the USPS because he does not want that money used for universal mail-in voting. He has falsely claimed that expanding mail-in voting would enable voter fraud and result in a, quote, rigged, unquote, election. McConnell, for what it's worth, has said he does not share the president's position. Now, some states have long used universal mail-in voting, including my own here in Washington state. More have moved towards mail-in voting for the November election, and Congress is considering legislation to expand and protect it across the country. So this week, DeJoy will be appearing before the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, that's on Friday, and then the House Oversight Committee on Monday. And in the run-up to those hearings, DeJoy just announced Tuesday afternoon, yesterday, that some of these policy changes we've been talking about will be suspended until after the November election. So we're definitely in a state of a lot of uncertainty, and here to sort of talk through some of that this afternoon, we are joined by House members Rashida Tlaib, Ro Khanna, and Chuy Garcia, ahead of those House hearings and the special session of Congress. Members, thank you for joining us, and we'll turn to each of you quickly and then expand this to a panel discussion. So I'll start with you, Representative Tlaib. Tell us a little bit about the impact of the administration's opposition to funding the Postal Service. What kinds of policies were implemented to slow the Postal Service down? Who is this hurting, and why would President Trump oppose it in the first place?
Yeah, and Jay, I think it's really important to understand that this is all happening also during a pandemic. And yes, of course, we see the intentionality by this administration using this political appointee to undermine our democracy and access to our right to vote, especially in Michigan, where we just are now, for the first time, exercising this year the changes to our election laws, where we allow no reason absentees. And our Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, sent out applications for folks, again, making it accessible so that they can be able to safely vote. And one of the things that we saw and hear from our residents, though, is yes, it's also about that. But mostly I hear folks saying, hey, my local business, my small business depends. Page's bookstore in my district, Miss Murphy, who owns it, said, it cost her about $50 to send some of these books out to her customers and to keep her local business afloat. It would cost 3 times that amount if she went through the UPS. And so, hearing from them. And then also yesterday, I heard from one of my residents, Mr. Reed, him and his grandkids get their medication through the mail. And so there's a lot of that direct impact. People depend so much on the United States Postal Service, which, until now was really just considered a service to the American people, nonpartisan, not for profit. This was, a service, as you all know, look at the data, shows that over close to 50% of the world's mail, not just in the United States, goes through the United States Postal Service. People depend on it, not only for their businesses, but their quality of life. But in this instance, during this pandemic, it is a huge weight on it to making sure that people are able to vote by mail. I heard from local postal workers yesterday that literally their sorting machines are disappearing. People don't understand. These are sorting machines that sort about 30,000 or more mail an hour. that was removed. The fact that they're not able to finish their shifts, their routes, so they're on a route, they need to finish. That's usually the typical process. They've been told, nope, stop what you're doing at that moment and walk away. Especially during the pandemic, where there's a greater need right now of access to the Postal Service. You see our administration not showing up for the American people and actually defunding and dismantling our Postal Service. The impact is real. There is such a tremendous fear among my residents that, yet again, not only in the school system or in the prison system, but now in our Postal Service, that you have a corrupt president and a forever impeached president that is trying to turn this into a for-profit scheme, but also in this moment to try to undermine our democracy and using that approach. So it is very much something that my residents are extremely concerned about. And what I hear, Jay, it's all across party lines. It's not just my Democratic residents or, these are folks that all share in commonality, that they all use the Postal Service for whatever services they need. And they're really dismayed and outraged by not only the Postmaster DeJoy, but the fact that the Trump administration is leading this effort.
Oh yeah, we had our first mute mistake. We love to see it. I'll turn to you, Congressman Khanna. You've advocated for universal mail-in voting as a necessity for a fair election during the coronavirus pandemic. If in this upcoming special session, what can Congress do to sort of counteract some of the Trump administration's actions with respect to the Postal Service? And more broadly, what are the major barriers to achieving true universal mail-in voting?
Well, thank you. Great to be on with Representative Troy Garcia and Representative Rashida Tlaib. We're going to have in front of our committee, the Oversight Committee, where Representative Tlaib is also on, the Postmaster General. And I think we have to get some very clear answers. First, it's not enough for him to suspend the damage that he's done. He's already fired 22 senior executives. He's already removed a lot of vote sorting machines. He's already removed a lot of mailboxes. He's already created the conditions of an expectation of short staffing. So what are we doing to reverse all the damage that he's done and reverse it expeditiously? That is of critical importance. Even if we give the Postmaster General the money now, how are we going to ensure that he's going to spend it expeditiously? There are a lot of provisions that allow discretion in being able to spend it. And how do we know that he's going to spend it on the efforts that are going to make a difference in getting ballots counted? This is the whole issue. I mean, there are a lot of states, and particularly battleground states, where ballots have to be in by election day. And so if you have a delay in getting ballots, and then you have a delay in ballots getting to the registrar, then many of these ballots will be discarded. Now, if you look at my state, at California, there, if you put a ballot in by election day, it has to be counted. But that is not the case in Wisconsin or Pennsylvania. And this is why I think Mark Elias's legal action is so important. What he's doing in Wisconsin, court decision to say that there has to be an extension for counting those ballots. It can't just be on election day. And they're doing the same thing in Pennsylvania. And we also need to start counting these ballots earlier. My fear is that if we don't do that, Trump may be up on election day. And even if he ends up losing by 5, 6, 7 points, he's going to try to proclaim victory and cast the election in doubt, which could trigger a constitutional crisis in this country. So we have to be prepared to get specifics on Monday from DeJoy about what corrective action is going to be taken. And then we need to have a plan in every state to make sure that the ballots are counted and counted accurately.
Thank you. Congressman Garcia, I want to step back a little bit and put this Postal Service crisis in the context of what we've seen as a decades-long effort by Republicans to suppress the vote, from voter ID laws to purging voter rolls to eliminating polling places, especially in cities. Now, White House advisor Larry Kudlow recently admitted as much. He suggested that Republicans in Washington oppose expansions or protections of voting rights, specifically in conjunction with these relief packages we're talking about. So setting aside just for a moment the universal mail-in voting issue we've discussed, more broadly speaking, what else can and should Congress do to protect votes both in this November's election and also beyond?
Thank you, Jay, for inviting me to be on the show today. So it's very clear that DeJoy's changes are not just another attack on the Postal Service. They're also a deliberate and malicious attempt to alter the outcome of the November election and surprise communities of color, immigrants, people with disabilities, young folks, and voters who don't speak English as their first language. As we know, voter suppression has a long and vicious history in the US. Poll taxes, literacy taxes, complicated registration laws, and other forms of voter suppression all trace their origins to times when a major political party decided that democracy wasn't in its electoral interest. So now Trump is waging an all-out campaign against mail-in voting, calling it a tragedy and saying that it invites massive fraud and abuse. We know misinformation is a major threat to our elections. It was consequential in 2016, and now a sitting president is using his platform to lie about the one tool that can get him out of power. So when we convene on Saturday, we're going to take up the Deliver for America Act. This is legislation that, one, would provide the necessary funding to ensure that we resume a level of normalcy as it relates to the delivery of mail. And let me just add that many people in my district haven't received mail for days. Some have even reported for weeks. So it is a serious problem. I went to one of my local post offices 3 days ago, and there was only one person at the desk, and he told me that he really hated to close for an hour, but he had to take a lunch, and their hours have also been reduced. The cuts in overtime pay are also having a severe impact on the delivery of mail. So along with the funding, what we are hoping to take action on Saturday is also to reverse some of the actions taken by DeJoy. Words are one thing, but even the words that he has said so far say that he has paused the things that he put into work. It's important that they not only be paused, but they be reversed, and that we get back to the operations of the post office as they were beginning on January 1st of this year. So that will also be in the legislation, as I understand at this point. This is a very serious issue. We are responding to the urgency, and there has been a calling out across the country for Congress to act. We are acting responsibly. As I stated at a press conference we had in Chicago yesterday with 8 members of Congress, this action by the Trump administration is nothing less than criminal intent during a pandemic. People's lives depend on the delivery of mail for medicines, for unemployment insurance checks, for immigration documents, for a host of things. And it's especially important to communities that do not have good internet service as well. Many households, so very critical. That's what's at play.
Thank you. I want to open the discussion up to the panel now, and I want to start by talking a little bit about the public response to this story, which has been, pretty outspoken, pretty robust. And as I mentioned earlier, the Postmaster General has announced a suspension of these policy changes until after the election. And President Trump has talked about taking care of the Postal Service. He hasn't elaborated on that, but that's at least something that suggests that some of this message, some of this protest is getting through. And I think we really see that reflected in some of the polling numbers, public opinion around this. So for example, a poll from The Hill finds 8 in 10 voters support funding the post office. Data for Progress ran a poll, found about 2/3 of voters support the proposed $25 billion relief package that we've been talking about. I'm wondering if you would speak a little bit to the impact of this public response on the administration's positions, on its public-facing positions, and how you think that could play out over the next couple of months.
I think Jay and I know Congressman Chewy and Kana would agree. I mean, the tweets and the statements and these suggestions that they're going to roll back or stop something is not going to get the sorting machines back or the mailboxes unlocked or addressing some of the issues they're doing to various routes. I think that's why we're still coming on Saturday to address those things and make sure that it actually is happening. So we don't need words. I think the American people deserve actual actions that match what they're trying to propose or suggest. I think that they are very fearful of what's happening. Many of us members of Congress, I know Congresswoman Haley Stevens, many of us are showing up to postal services and locations to actually see places where these large sorting machines were removed, other places where we're seeing images of mailboxes, removed from neighborhoods, from corners of neighborhoods. And that's why I think it's really critically important as those that are listening to not be misled. I know I want to be hopeful, but one thing that we noticed with this administration, there's a lot of words, a lot of tweets, but the action doesn't match what they're suggesting or what they're trying to imply with those words and statements. I think Friday and Monday is going to be very telling. I'm very eager to question Postmaster General DeJoy, to ask him specific questions about some of those actions and whether or not he's going to go back. But let's be very clear. Even after November, it's wrong. After November, you should not be making these changes that, again, the American people rely on this service. This should not be politicized. And let's be honest, many of the folks that are around this Trump administration are same folks that were leading the movement to privatize the United States Postal Service. That's been in the works for decades now. Again, just like they've done with privatizing our prisons, our school system, you name it, the corporate greed schemes are embedded into some of these actions by this administration. So even after November, be just very clear, many of us in Congress are not going to sit by and allow them to dismantle and defund the Postal Service.
Let me hop in on your question, Jay.
Say it again.
If I can just hop in on
yes, of course.
that question. It's very clear that members of Congress have been bombarded with calls from constituents, regardless of whether they represent blue or red districts. Why? Because people rely on the mail for their daily survival. People support the post office more so than almost any other institution, government institution in the country. It's a constitutionally authorized service that provides universal service to everyone in the country, whether you live in a rural community, in a suburban community, or in cities like Chicago, Detroit, LA, etc. And that's why there is this uproar. The polling that you shared with us is an indication of that strong support. And that's what made the Trump administration have to reverse, at least in word, their position previously taken. And that's why Trump has also apparently changed his position on this. And Mitch McConnell knows very well that they better consider passing adequate funding for the post office, because the American people are clamoring for a return to normal operations.
One thing I want to ask is, I want to take just a little bit of a step back from the Postal Service specifically and talk about the sort of the larger ideological goals that seem to be in play here. It seems like, from all indications, President Trump has talked about the need to privatize the Postal Service, as have many Republicans. And the aim really seems to be starving the Postal Service of funding and reducing its ability to deliver the mail, as Congresswoman Tlaib mentioned, after November, not just for this election. What is the broader implication that you see of the president's attack on the Postal Service?
Well, this attack hasn't started with Trump. This attack has started actually with George W. Bush in 2006, where they passed a bill that handcuffs the Postal Service, requiring them to put away funding for 75 years of a letter carrier's retirement. It's an absurd requirement. And it's part of the Republican agenda since the Reagan Revolution to privatize the public commons, privatize public schools, privatize the postal service, privatize healthcare. There is a sense of an erosion of the common good, of the public good, of community, and an absolute adherence to shareholder profits, to profit maximization, and to unfettered free markets. And this is the ideology that's gripped the Republican Party. So I think Representative Tlaib is very right that it's an urgent crisis right now because of it's threatening the right to vote. But well beyond that, we need to stand up for the post office as essential, just like public schools are essential, just like public hospitals are essential, as essential pillars of our society.
Lastly, I want to talk a little bit about accountability. As we've mentioned, it's one thing for the administration to say that they're going to, reverse some of these policy changes. It's another to see that happening, boots on the ground, and particularly with respect to an organization like the Postal Service, which is spread out all across the country. And there's no way for one person or a small group of people to really have oversight over that. Particularly as you prepare for these upcoming hearings, what are some things that you still don't know that you hope to find out from Postmaster DeJoy, and what is the best way for Congress, for the millions of people who aren't in Congress, how can they hold the post office accountable here?
Yeah, I really think we should uplift the workers. Honestly, a lot of this has been done in the dark. And if it wasn't for the whistleblowers or for the courageous postal workers that have come forward to inform us that this was happening, in the last 40 days, I need to know exactly from day one what Postmaster General DeJoy has done, because what we're seeing, and we don't fully understand the extent of how far they went. We're hearing it from some of the courageous workers have come forward and said, this just disappeared. I showed up to the sorting station and it's gone. I have been told, that I'm not supposed to do certain routes this length. And even though that means, for instance, if they're getting 75,000 pieces of mail in one of our cities here in Michigan, and they're told, okay, just do 50,000 today. Well, tomorrow, there's going to be additional 25,000 on top of that 75,000. And so the delay is there. And we even saw it in our primary election where absentee ballots showed up. Michigan's one of those states that if it doesn't get there by the election night by 8 p.m., then it doesn't get counted. And so for folks to know, our local clerks here in my district in Wayne County, I know we're trying to be 10 steps ahead because we don't know enough, is that we have now drop boxes. We're creating our own way of getting the ballots to our clerks. So if it's in the drop box by 8 p.m. in November for election, then we definitely are going to count it. We're trying to, and that's money that folks in local communities that don't really have those resources are trying to, again, circumvent and push back against what this administration is doing. But for the American people to know, our postal workers are the ones with the eyes and ears, because this administration has not been truthful to our committee. We've held so many of the members of their cabinet in contempt because they're not following through on subpoenas and information. I think many of us are consistently trying to, be the co-equal branch of government, to hold them accountable, be the eyes and ears again of the American people and getting that information out. I just hope DeJoy is going to be able to lay out in the last 40 days what exactly he's done with the agency and how we can go back and try to restore some of those dismantling of resources.
Yeah, Jay, if I can jump in, the coming forth of people who work in the post office as whistleblowers, as experts in how the post office functions is really very critical and very patriotic of people to do. We saw this happen in the State Department. We've seen it in the military as Trump plays his hand at attempting to be an authoritarian figure and to usher in a real control that is rooted in authoritarianism, we see measures like the ones he has just taken with respect to the office, seeking to become implemented and wants to get people accustomed to this. But what I think he is forgetting is that the country is in a momentous, in a tumultuous period. The movement for racial justice, coupled with all of the revelations of the pandemic and the inequities and unfairness in the system in our country, are a force to be reckoned with. And that is why I believe that there will be greater resistance to what Representative Ro Khanna has alluded to, and that is this mad drive to try to privatize public service and institutions that were created to provide service and to help people and to improve the quality of people's lives. And you cannot and should not try to extract profit from them. Just like with public education and things like water systems in the country, they should be for the benefit and for the good of everyone in our country.
Thank you. Congressman Khanna, I'd love to give you the last word here.
Well, I agree with everything that Representative Garcia and Representative Tlaib have said. I would just say that people shouldn't be discouraged or feel powerless. I mean, we've seen that concerted action and activism around the country can lead to change. I mean, there is rank corruption in this administration, but even that corruption has been put to a halt, or at least has been paused when citizens mobilize. We saw this when Trump was forced to reverse his horrific and cruel order separating kids from their parents. We've seen this in the failure of them to repeal the Affordable Care Act. And I believe it's the mobilization that has put a stop to this scheme of trying to steal the election. What I will say is that Trump is desperate. I mean, he sees the same polls we do. And my fear is that what other schemes do they have? I mean, we discovered the post office one, but what other efforts do they have between now and November to try to take advantage of the system and give Trump an unfair advantage? And so I would just say it's not just for Congress to be vigilant, it's for the entire public, for all of us to be vigilant. And I salute the whistleblowers. And we're going to have to really be active and mobilize to make sure that this election isn't stolen from us.
Thank you, Representative Khanna. I think that's a good, if also ominous, place to leave it. I want to thank each of you for joining us this afternoon. And to our viewers at home, thank you for watching. I'm Jay Willis. This has been The Briefing. Have a great afternoon.